Good afternoon, everybody. For us here in Asia, good morning to our friends in Europe, and there are quite a few people joining this one from the Brussels and broader European community. Welcome to this latest webinar from the EU-ASEAN Business Council. Today we are talking about EU-ASEAN relations, views from the front line. The full title was post-pandemic, but I think we are still really in the middle of the pandemic, so perhaps it should be during and post-pandemic. I'm very grateful today to be joined by two very good friends of the EU-ASEAN Business Council. We have coming to us from Jakarta, His Excellency Igor Drijsmans, who is the EU Ambassador to ASEAN and is a long-standing friend of ASEAN, having previously covered the Asia role whilst in the cabinet of Federica Mogherini, and previously also was a desk officer in the European External Action Service covering the ASEAN region. And we're also joined by another good friend, His Excellency Jaya Ratnam, who is the Singapore Ambassador to the European Union, Belgium and the Netherlands, a post he's held since 2016. So he's long versed in European ASEAN relations and European Singapore relations. Jaya also has a very long and distinguished career in the diplomatic service for Singapore as well. So good afternoon to you both. Thank you for joining us today. A quick overview. As I'm sure many of you know, the EU and ASEAN have got a very long-standing relationship. It spans more than 40 years now, since 1977, I think, when it was first formalized. And during that time, the relationship has grown, particularly through trade, where the EU is ASEAN's second largest trading partner, and through investments, where we are the largest investor into Southeast Asia. And beyond that, it also covers, of course, social, cultural, political, and security ties as well. And we shouldn't forget those as part of this discussion today. The EU is also amongst some of the largest donors to the ASEAN region, recently announced a €800 million package of COVID-19 related support to ASEAN. And the two blocs are particularly complementary when it comes to trade issues, both promoting the idea of an open, rules-based global trading environment. The EU has also provided a lot of support to ASEAN through a number of programs, such as the EREADI Plus project, which supports ASEAN regional integration, EREADI, which is a dialogue instrument promoting region-to-region discussions, and also through SHARE, which supports higher education. And indeed, I think later this week, and I'm sure Igor will mention it, there is a series of events around higher education and scholarships between the EU and ASEAN. Both sides, since the beginning of 2019, have been discussing elevating relations to a strategic partnership, but that at the moment seems to be a bit stuck. We've been talking for some time about a region-to-region deal and also a comprehensive air transport agreement as well, which is at least is negotiated, just waiting for some ink to be found for some pens, from what I can understand. But we will dive into both of those matters as well. And I think one of the key questions for this discussion today is, what are the prospects for taking the relationship on to the next step? How can we make it deeper, more comprehensive? And what will that mean? And perhaps I'll actually start with that question, gentlemen, and perhaps Jai, you may want to go first, but what does taking EU-ASEAN relationships to a strategic partnership mean in practice, and how can we get there?
Well, good morning to everybody around the world. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me here for this event. It is really timely, mainly because we are in the midst of an unprecedented crisis, and we will be, and will remain so for quite a while. How we emerge from it remains to be seen, and in that regard, it is a good time to review and see how we can reset the EU-ASEAN relationship in a way that supports our recovery for both sides when we come out of it. Both sides will be significantly transformed by the crisis. But speaking from where I sit here, the EU is already undergoing a fundamental transformation, even prior to COVID. If you look at the EU agenda of this particular commission, it is massive in terms of what they plan to do under the digital transformation and what they plan to do under the green agenda. The trade review that is going on, the developments on foreign investment, whether you're looking at the foreign investment screening mechanism, level playing field on foreign subsidies, And of course, Brexit, which will reshape the way Europe functions, the EU functions. All of that present both opportunities and challenges for ASEAN. And because we have to deal with a new landscape in the EU, and how we do so will determine whether it presents more challenges rather than opportunities, or more opportunities rather than challenge. The immediate challenge is really cognitive. The scope of this of the EU's ambition to reshape Europe is quite clear, but the way it would operate, I mean, from what I've seen over the last 4 years, is cumulative. It'll be incremental, but the effect will be substantial. How does ASEAN react to all of this? Particularly if you look at areas such as trade. You mentioned the ASEAN EU trade agenda, especially our long desired free trade agreement the region to region. The EU is dramatically relooking its own trade strategy, how it can be implemented, how it can be expanded, but also looking at expanding it beyond trade related issues. The trade and sustainability chapter is one area of this. I was glancing at my press spec today, and I see the formal decision on Cambodia losing its duty-free access in some ways to EU markets is one of the headlines. But at the same time, I think one of the features of the ASEAN-EU relationship has been that we have been focusing on these issues rather than the opportunities for us to work together. Whether you're looking at the green agenda or the digital agenda for the EU, to make it a reality, you need partners. When we both ASEAN and the EU use the same language, rule-based multilateral structures, rule-based systems that we support. Our needs for it are obvious, but making it work beyond the mantra, that is really a chore. It is a daily slog to do so. And here, ASEAN and the EU should slog together. Whether you're looking at the green agenda or the digital agenda, because our broad ambitions are similar. ASEAN is far more diverse, but where we want to end up is not very different from where the EU wants to end up. And we should work together to co-create rules that can guide us. It's not easy. I'm not saying that it's easy, but what it is a far better alternative than a far more disjointed, fragmented, and jagged landscape that we have to deal with each other. I will leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Igor, how would you see the relationship developing, and how we can get to that strategic partnership ideal that we're all chasing after?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me, and I hope everybody can see me, albeit in black and white today. I mean, I fully agree with basically everything that Jaya said. Well, first of all, we see momentous changes within the EU over the last, basically couple of months. The steps that we've taken in terms of European integration are basically unprecedented. The recovery package and what it implies also in terms of the Commission borrowing on the market is something that we wouldn't have thought possible only a couple of years back. But it's equally true that to implement our entire agenda, be it on the Green Deal side, be it on the digital side, we need worldwide partners. We need cooperation. Just on the green side, we have set ourselves very ambitious target to reduce our net emissions to 0 by 2050. Now, even if we were to do that, the global impact wouldn't be tremendous, because our share of worldwide emissions is actually relatively low. So we need partners to achieve that very, very ambitious agenda. And I think, if anything, this crisis has shown that we are two partners that are always looking for cooperation. While some were, playing the politics of generosity, or others were basically isolating themselves, both the European Union and ASEAN, I think we chose another path. That's the path of worldwide cooperation. Knowing very well that nobody will be safe until everybody's safe, and I think that in a way we've grown towards each other over those last a couple of months, and I think there's a realization that we're all in this together. If we are to save the multilateral world order, if we are to save, say, international rule of law, we are in this together. So I think I'm relatively optimistic as to the next steps for EU-ASEAN. And in terms of what's next, I mean, there's so much we can do more. But let me just say that sometimes I feel like, just as you very well did, Chris, at the start, just reiterate how intense our relationship is. I do think, and nobody ever contested me when I said that we were the most comprehensive partner of ASEAN. We have dialogues on 20 different topics. Biggest investor, largest provider of development funding, and I would argue also the biggest supporter of ASEAN centrality. So I think we do have a special agenda between European Union and ASEAN, but we can definitely always do more and better. And of course, I'm the first one to want to do that.
Thanks. So you mentioned that, very strong supporters of ASEAN from the EU, the number of areas we're in dialogue with them, the support we provide, the financial and intellectual support as well. And yet taking the relationship to that strategic partnership area is proving slightly difficult at the moment. I think it is true to say there are some irritants in the relationship, things like palm oil being one. How do we get around some of those irritants so that we can get to that strategic partnership? Who would like to go first? With the curveball question.
Well, we can do a tag team, me and Igor, but then since you asked the curveball question, it is a difficult question. I mean, we can let our relationship be defined by what you call irritants. Or we can, as Igor pointed out, build on a substantial relationship. The base is solid, the base is strong, and the base is growing. I would be careful about using words like irritants also in the relationship, because for the ASEAN member states, so regardless of these issues, they are substantial and real issues, and these are issues that need to be dealt with to move their respective bilateral relationships forward. I know there are processes in the way. The EU, the EAS particularly, is working with the countries concerned in terms of how best to deal with it. Both sides have their positions, and but this is what we mean by a rule-based system. Just because we have a rule-based system doesn't mean that it's a dispute-free system. A rule-based system is defined by how we resolve our disputes, how we resolve our differences. So the existence of differences doesn't define the relationship. What defines the relationship is how we resolve them, and also how we can move forward in the relationship, even as we deal with these issues. You had mentioned CATA, the Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement, and there's a shortage of ink in terms of signing it. I'm quite sure there's plenty of ink around the table, but then I cannot I cannot understate the value of that agreement. I mean, it is something that we had negotiated some time ago, and it's coming to hopefully a conclusion this year. But in this era in which our air links and our people-to-people movement have been so affected, having an agreement there in which Qatar is not just about opening up of markets between ASEAN and the EU. It's also about subsidies, competition. It's also about safety and health standards, and harmonizing it. It is as the term used for it, a comprehensive air transport agreement. It is not an air traffic agreement. Having it done this year, I think, would be an extremely strong and clear signal that we can move ahead. And I'm hopeful that we can make significant progress towards it this year. Thank you.
Shall I? First of all, again, seconding everything that Jaya has said, especially on the comprehensive air transport agreement. It's such an important agreement with potential benefits for 1 billion people. So we should do everything we can, especially in the current times with the aviation sector being hit the way it was, to get that done and dusted. But to reply to your question, Chris, I think we want a relationship that is mature enough to deal with kind of difficulties or differences that we always have, and there always will be in any relationship. Number one. Number two, I think that there are some differences between the European Union and Indonesia and Malaysia on the issue of palm oil. I'm sure you were referring to that. I think from where we're sitting, it's important that these bilateral issues remain bilateral and that they don't creep into the EU-ASEAN agenda. That's what we've been trying to say since the beginning. And I think that realization is there more and more that is indeed the way to go. And we've always said that we're open for any kind of conversation on this. It's somehow even easier these days through video conference than it used to be. We can discuss anytime. Now on the substance of it, you know that Indonesia launched the case against us at the WTO. There's actually, as a consequence, very little I can say on the substance, as my legal advisors say. But I would say this though, there is still, even after so many months, a certain lack of understanding of what the Renewable Energy Directive 2 actually entails. And even yesterday, I was told by somebody that the directive implies a limitation of access to the European market. Now, can I just repeat that it's not the case? And I was looking to the figures this morning, and I was surprised to see that actually palm oil exports from ASEAN to the European Union have jumped by 40% in the first 5 years in 2020 as compared to the previous year. Now, there's all kinds of explanations for that, but I just mentioned that to say there is no such thing as a market access barriers. However, other arguments there or allegations there might be unjustified or not. But the bottom line of what I wanted to say is that we understand these are important issues for Indonesia and Malaysia. We understand that very well, and I'm sitting here in Jakarta, and every day I understand it more and more. But it's important that we find the space to talk about this, and that we find a good way forward. And in any case, we now have the WTO dispute settlement, which has been triggered.
Thank you. Yes, it's a very tricky area, but I'm sure resolution can be found at some point through dialogue and discussion. And really, I hope it doesn't block further developments at the region-to-region level as well, like you both said. But when Jaya was opening up on the first question, he mentioned the trade agenda from the EU and the trade agenda going beyond what some people would say was pure trade issues into things like sustainability, environmental protection type issues. And the EU, of course, has got its Green Deal now, which I think needs to be explained a lot more in this part of the world. And that's probably beholden on people like myself and Igor to do that around the region as we hopefully at some point start traveling again and meeting people. But what do you both see as the opportunity perhaps for ASEAN with the European Green Deal going forward? Not just on trade, but perhaps in terms of sustainable development in ASEAN. So Igor, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's true that the Green Deal is actually a very comprehensive deal. It's not just about, I don't know, forestry or climate or this or that. It is a more fundamental change in the way we go about our policy, inspired by what we see as being one of the biggest challenges of our times, which is, or maybe the biggest, which is the challenge of climate change. So it's important as these policies unfold and pieces of legislation unfold as proposed by the Commission, be it on biodiversity, be it on farm to fork, be it on deforestation. There will be another big conference in October, that we explain that very carefully and that we underline that this is not a protectionist policy, but rather fully compliant with whatever the WTO will say or think. So that's point number one. Now for our work with ASEAN, we have already started a good cooperation on say green issues. We have two very successful projects underway. One is to support biodiversity in ASEAN with the center based in the Philippines, supporting these ASEAN heritage parks, which I would recommend if ever you have the time to visit. But also a second very successful project, which we just launched on sustainable use of pitlands, again, focused mainly on Indonesia and Malaysia. But I think these are two examples of what we could do in all areas and what we would like to do in all areas. And one issue which I might mention is the one we spoke about before of renewable energy. I think we do have to have a more structured conversation about energy and energy policy, renewable energy. And I'm happy that at the end of this month, the European Commission will be invited to attend the ASEAN Energy Summit online, as all of them are, to actually start that conversation on renewable energy. So we need a dialogue on that, and secondly, we need to put our financial means that we do deploy at the disposal of that important topic. And then I'm thinking notably about the ASEAN Green Catalytic Finance Facility, which we started to finance with a 50 million euro grant, but that will only grow in the future.
Thanks. And Jai, your views?
I cannot but agree with Igor again. But we didn't work out a common hymn sheet on this, but it does reflect the relationship we have, that there is broad areas in which we are fundamentally aligned, and the key is how we move forward and build on it. On the Green Deal, I think one important part of it would be, as you yourself, Chris, mentioned, how does this impact on ASEAN when the rubber hits the road? And the key area in which ASEAN engages with the EU on this will be through businesses, through our businesses, through EU businesses, and ultimately through supply chains. And that comes back to one of the questions you raised, because supply chains post-COVID would be fundamentally restructured. We are looking at an era where we are moving from just in time to just in case. When it comes to just in case, it is not a question of geography. It's a question of resilience of the supply chains. How strong can the supply chains be when pressured. And in that regard, there's incredible scope for where ASEAN and the EU can move forward, and also use our trade agenda to give that kind of resilience to our supply chains with the EU, and secondly, to build the rules that would give the assurance to businesses at the end of the day that there is resilience in this. I was just looking at a tweet from my colleague my EU colleague in Singapore, Barbara, who tweeted that EU imports from Singapore over the last 6 months went up by 11% or 12%. EU imports globally had gone down by almost a similar figure. The FTA that we signed a year ago clearly has provided that kind of assurances in terms of the supply chain to allow for trade to increase in this particularly difficult period when everything else is going south. But at the same time, it also requires individual government decisions and policy coherence, policy consistency. If you do a little bit, and we are still doing a deep dive into the numbers, but one key outcome from the numbers is because from Singapore's perspective, now we do not impose export bans. EU businesses in Singapore function regardless of whether we have shortages or not. And so one of the key areas in which exports from Singapore to EU went up was in the pharma sector, where clearly there was a broad need globally, and so the pharma sector was servicing that need, and you can see that reflected. But you need that kind of reassurance, that kind of resilience to be built into the relationship between the EU and ASEAN. You can do that at two levels. You can do that at the legal level in terms of relationship, but ultimately relationships are built on trust. And so there needs to be a greater deal of strategic trust between EU and ASEAN. And that's where, coming back to Igor's first point, the broad-based nature of our relationship should be gear the relationship up to build up that kind of common trust and strategic trust that would give the rules that we seek to establish with each other meaning.
Let's talk a bit more about the trade agenda that you were talking about. So we're coming up to the first year anniversary of the implementation of the EU-Singapore FTA, which you just mentioned. And there's certainly been some good numbers this week, at least as far as Singapore is concerned, for increased usage under that agreement. We got the EU-Vietnam FTA, which has just been implemented on the 1st of August this year. So how do you both see those as developing over time and as stepping stones perhaps to a broader region-to-region deal in the future? And I asked this question partly also because at the end of this month, we're going to have the consultation between Phil Hogan, the EU Trade Commissioner, and his ASEAN counterparts. So, and I'd like to get your thoughts about how you see that discussion going as well.
Well, I think here me and Igor may have a slight divergence in views.
At last.
Well, I think the EU can walk and chew gum at the same time, which means that I think it's important that the EU builds on the agreements with Singapore and now with Vietnam, which roughly takes care of about 40%, 40-45% of EU's trade with ASEAN, with significant agreements with other ASEAN partners. The EU is progressing very strongly with Indonesia. Hopefully, Thailand, Malaysia, and Vietnam come online, and we move ahead on that, so that as Chris, you highlighted, it can be a stepping stone towards an ASEAN EU FTA. At the same time, I don't think we should carry on a connect the dots approach. I think we can simultaneously work on ASEAN EU FTA that actually complements, builds on the bilateral agreements that we do. So I think we cannot go back to the way we worked in the past for the future. We really need to rethink how we do FTAs with each other and how we can make it work.
Well, I mean, I hear what you said. First of all, Singapore, a big success story already now that FTA we have concluded and entered into force. I'm sure Vietnam will be equally a success story with elimination of 90% of all tariffs and 65% of duties on EU exports eliminated at the entry into force. So that will give definitely a big boost also to the bilateral trade with Vietnam, and I would suppose also reinforce its position as production base and its position within the regional and global supply chain. So we would think that logically that would also speed up the bilateral negotiations we have indeed with a number of other ASEAN countries, with Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia. We hope also with the Philippines, and that will we can expect also boost the interest of those respective countries to speed up the negotiations. I think as far as the EU-ASEAN track is concerned, the latest rounds of discussions shown that we're still far apart on a number of things. I think from where we're sitting, it's important for the very reasons we just talked about, that there is something about competition. There is some agreement on issues like procurement, on sustainable development. And it is true that sometimes on some of these issues, ASEAN doesn't always have a consolidated or a common position. So I think it's important to continue that specific and expert-based discussion on all of these issues, so that we can then, once we have laid the ground a bit better, that we can proceed with the EU-ASEAN FTA talks in a more, in a quicker way.
We conduct a regular business sentiment survey every year, and every year without fail it comes out and says that European businesses want a region-to-region trade deal, and they want it now. So I'll ask a question for you both, which I might regret, and the question is, what more could organisations such as the one that I work for do to help promote this and bring both sides closer together?
Well, I think if one of the bottlenecks is that there is maybe not enough, say, common policy or common rules on some of these issues for us to enter into a structured region-to-region FTA, that is maybe to create that awareness on, again, issues like competition, procurement, sustainable development, things which are for us, not to speak about the European Parliament, extremely important, and which are part and parcel of the benefits that I'm sure you as business would also expect from an FTA. So I think creating that awareness, continuing those discussions, I think might be one piece of advice I might allow myself to give. Thank you.
Jaya, any views?
Well, I think from the business perspective, it'll be good to get a sense of what really matters to you today and moving forward. The trade negotiators work on a little bit of lag in data in terms of what really matters to businesses. And one area in which I think we could use some real input from business would be on the digital side. If you look at the way we are working with each other, we are zooming right now, and zooming has become a verb rather than a brand in that regard. But then it does reflect the world that we are going to enter into. And for European businesses working in the region, to give us your perspective, say on one area in which they will reshape the regional environment, digital. What are the barriers you face? How can you leverage of it? Where are the regulations within ASEAN that can improve that? Sitting in Singapore, you know that we have had digital agreements with a number of countries, what we call DPAS, digital economic partnership agreements, because we are also trying to look forward to see how we can help businesses to do so. We just did one with Australia last week. A couple of weeks ago, we did one with Korea, and before that, we have a common one with New Zealand, Chile, New Zealand and Chile, and I think we are looking forward to doing more such agreements. But this is clearly an area that would benefit from EU business inputs.
I could answer your question by a metaphor, which is if you're building a house, you've got to get the foundations right. And the foundations would start with tackling with more basic things like non-tariff barriers to trade, both within the region and between the two regions as well. You mentioned the digital side. I mean, clearly ASEAN has very high hopes on digitization, on digital economy, helping with sustained development across the region. Perhaps a question for Igor first. I mean, what do you think that Europe can bring to that digitization discussion within ASEAN? And then for Jaya, what would you like Europe to bring? And indeed, what can both sides learn from each other as part of this process?
Okay. Well, we have started a discussion on digital economy with the ASEAN side. On something very concrete, which is the European Digital Economy and Society Index, which is basically monitoring progress of relevant digital indicators. But I think we need a wider and a more structural engagement, for example, on the functioning of digital market, be it in the European Union or in ASEAN. I admit I am not an expert in digital affairs, but there's definitely a lot of work and indeed legislation that we have put into that digital market over the last couple of years, which might be useful to share. Secondly, an area you are very familiar with as well, Chris, and that is the one of data protection. Actually, I think it's next week on the 19th. There is another a data forum, I think in Singapore, where our colleagues from the European Commission participate. When colleagues from the Commission came here to Indonesia, or indeed in other parts of the region, we do find a lot of interest in the general data protection regulation. Some of them having adopted similar pieces of legislations. Others are looking with a lot of interest, and that's another area which more than ever it's so important.
Well, Chris, if I can build on Igor's points and actually answer one of the questions being posed by Mr. Jan von Herf, and to address it, I think in ASEAN, we're all individually grappling with this and trying to move ahead with this, particularly on privacy issues, data protection. The EU certainly has moved ahead on this, but at the end of the day, if we're all going to come up with different rules and different regulations to govern it, largely similar but not the same. But when it's similar and not the same, that's where the jaggedness exists for businesses, and that's where costs come in. The key, my key proposition would be that even as the EU moves forward to create some of these rules, they should open a window to talk to partners such as ASEAN and individual ASEAN countries, to see that the rules that you create actually can be convergent to, or at least interoperable with what is happening in ASEAN countries. We may not be able to create the same rules, but making sure that the rules are interoperable would be key. And for these rules to be interoperable, and like Igor, I'm not an expert, this is where business inputs come in, become so critical. Because what we need is for you to tell us which are the rules that is giving you pain, and which are the rules that you think we can do better.
That's fair enough. You should both go away and read the Business Council's paper on digital data and governance issues. There's some clear recommendations for both of you within that paper itself. Let's talk more now about COVID-19 and perhaps the impact that's having on relations. I've mentioned earlier that the very large sum of money that the EU has provided to the region in terms of COVID-19 related support. And perhaps Igor might want to explain more what that's for at this point. But also, do you think there are lessons that can be learned by both sides about how we've approached this in terms of information sharing, in terms of how we've approached lockdowns, or indeed about how we can approach the eventual opening up again?
I'll start with the easy part, and that is to explain what we've done. I think on COVID-19, as I tried to say at the start, it has brought the European Union and ASEAN somewhat closer together. I think what we try to do is, as I said, not work with short-term announcements or photo opportunities, but really work in a structural way with our partners around the world, but also in ASEAN. And the financing that we've provided, over 800 million euro for the ASEAN region, tries to do exactly that. Some examples in Myanmar, we finance some of the garment workers, tens of thousands of garment workers that are out of job because of COVID-19. Here in Indonesia, we finance 3 hospitals in East Java, North Sulawesi, and South Sulawesi in the Philippines. We work with the Department of Health, providing technical assistance. In others, we do more of budget support. So really a structural support in different areas, be it social protection, healthcare, or economic recovery. But I think more broadly, we share a narrative that is not to pursue the blame game, but try to find a common solution to this. And I think the fight against disinformation on COVID-19 is one of the essential issues we also agree in. I mean, there's the wildest rumors out there about where the virus comes from, how it spread, and indeed how it can be cured. So that's and some of these rumors are not spread in a genuine way just by lack of knowledge. So some of these are actually rather Gnostic. So I think we share, say, a political point of departure, a narrative. We as European Union tried also to provide the necessary financial support on these different sectors, and on top of that, work on another important issue, which is research. We work with the Louis Pasteur Institute in Cambodia, with the Myanmar National Health Laboratory on testing in Myanmar, because of course that is another part of this equation of the response that we need to find to COVID-19. Now, you in terms of what to do and what not to do, and kind of the book of best practices, you read all kinds of pieces of advice in the papers all the time, and I never would have guessed that an issue like wearing a mask or not would be such a controversial thing in politics. But I think the probably the wise thing to do would be to follow the advice of the World Health Organization, because also here we just need a general international framework for doing things and how to treat what is essentially a health crisis and a health crisis still.
Jai, I mean, lessons that ASEAN could learn from the EU, or things you could teach the EU on COVID-19 response. We've had within ASEAN several special summits taking place now. We have the Hanoi Plan of Action, supposedly for joined up response on COVID-19. How do you see these things reading across perhaps the EU-ASEAN relations?
I mean, my first point would be that, getting into a lockdown was far easier than getting out of a lockdown.
That's true.
And we are all grappling with not lockdowns, but getting out of a lockdown in a safe and secure manner. We're all learning by doing. and there is so much that we can learn from each other to make sure we don't make the same mistakes. That would be my first point. My second point would be that two specific areas when you're getting out of a lockdown that we can work on, which are interrelated and almost sequential. Firstly, borders, and especially for businesses. The reopening of borders, you mentioned moving around the region. The reopening of borders within the region, between regions, becomes so crucial. How we can do so in a safe and secure manner is something that I think we all need to have a serious, not just discussion, but really work together in the nuts and bolts. How we can do so to reopen our borders with one another in a safe and robust manner. That can deal with what we are seeing right now, which is really a successive waves of the virus, and we will only emerge out of it, which is my second point. And to build on Igor's point about research and also meaningful research, vaccines. And there are two elements to it: a vaccine to address the issue, also therapeutics to deal with the effects of the virus. How can ASEAN and the EU also work on vaccine development and also eventually the distribution of a vaccine, and in the meantime therapeutics? These are areas in which discussions are actually going on bilaterally and also at the region to region, but it's something that should occupy us and will occupy us for the next 6 to 18 months, which will have significant effect on how we emerge from this crisis.
Jai, you and I were joking before we started the webinar about running out of adjectives to describe the situation that we're currently in: unprecedented, extraordinary, and so on. But the situation, I guess some people would say, was not unexpected. Some commentators for a long time have been talking about the possible effects of such pandemics, and in the past, ASEAN at least was working on pandemic preparedness and business continuity plans. But I think one thing the pandemic has shown that countries and indeed companies did not have sufficiently good business continuity plans in place. Is this an area where perhaps the two blocs can cooperate in the future going forward in terms of developing ideas and concepts and doing research on?
Well, I mean, for sure. I mean, I think if you look at the responses of the individual European Union member states in the first couple of weeks and months, I think it left a lot to be desired at different levels, and I think we realized that we do lack a few fundamental issues, hence the decision, for example, to acquire a stockpile of personal protective equipment at the European Union level. And I noted with interest the conclusions of I think it was the last ASEAN summit, which said exactly the same thing, that we needed a regional stockpile of PPE. So there is definitely a lot of ground for a kind of a joint lessons learned exercise, because clearly, especially on the European side, it was a very steep learning curve.
I think a steep learning curve for all of us as we dealt with it and learned from the crisis how better we can improve our responses. And it's still a learning process, and certainly we can learn together. There's one aspect coming back to the point where businesses are central, is our supply chains and how we can build that kind of reassurance and resilience within the supply chains. When I was looking at some of the data for PPEs, personal protection equipment, and there were like 5 or 6 key items on that, and we look at the top 5 exporters of these items. What struck me was, besides the usual suspect, EU countries and ASEAN countries featured high in every one of these categories, whether you're looking at gloves, mask, and all that. Clearly, we both have production capacities and supply chains that are well linked to each other. And this is something, again, when you're looking at contingency planning, it's something that we should be able to work on to better deal with future waves and also future pandemics.
Of course, we do have the world's largest producer of surgical gloves sitting here in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia, with Top Glove. Talking more about perhaps geopolitics and the impact that's having on EU-ASEAN relations. Big tensions at the moment between China and the US, of course, in a number of different areas. How do you see that impacting on the development of EU-ASEAN relations? Does it make it more important? Is ASEAN in particular looking for the EU to step up to the plate more?
Well, if I can take that, I was also looking at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies 2020 survey, which they do among the ASEAN elites to get their perceptions on key issues, which is an interesting corollary to what you do, Chris, EU-ASEAN in terms of business sentiment. So this is more the political side and the policymaker side. And the first conclusion that you get from the survey is ASEAN is caught in the crossfire between with this rising geopolitical tensions. The second conclusion you can read from this survey is that it is not just ASEAN doesn't want to choose sides. Level of trust in either side is significantly low for both sides. And interestingly, the third conclusion from that survey is that Japan and the EU become far more attractive partners for ASEAN. And this goes back to a point I made earlier about trust. And this is a point that the EU will come in stronger, I expect, in the coming years. As geopolitical tensions rise, ASEAN also will look for trusted partners. I know this whole question of not choosing sides and becomes very central. But when you're looking at issues like this, it is not a binary choice. It's not a single choice. It is literally multiple choices that you will make on different issues. And in that regard, ASEAN would need partners. ASEAN countries would need more partners. And clearly the EU stands as a preferred partner, a partner of choice on many of these issues.
Igor, anything you want to add?
I can't disagree with that. I think we all know that the US-China rivalry will not go away. If anything, it will probably only get worse. And I think what the EU has to offer, what the EU interest is, largely coincides, I think, with what ASEAN wants. We want basically two things, which seem simple but are not. One is a rules-based international order, a rules-based international order. By the way, if you read the latest statement of the ASEAN foreign ministers they made on the ASEAN Day, I think they say it about 3-4 times, rules-based international order. So it's something we share 100% also on issues of maritime security, but not just. Secondly, we want to see ASEAN centrality, and we do have an interest, a geopolitical interest in a strong, united and coherent ASEAN bloc that is able to put itself at the center of that regional architecture, as they have done so successfully over the last couple of decades. But of course, the more the pressure rises from either side, the more important that coherence is. So also there, I think in the EU, ASEAN has an ally.
There's a question on the Q&A from Noel Clehan, who I know Jaya knows extremely well. He needs our Brussels liaison group for the Business Council. And the question from him is that it was a surprise to many, or a disappointment perhaps to many, that ASEAN was not mentioned in the letter from the European Commission President to Commissioner Hogan on his priorities coming into his new job. Things were listed like WTO, which of course is very important to sort out, the transatlantic relationship, Brexit, with Africa featuring above ASEAN and ASEAN not being mentioned at all. How much of that was a disappointment to both of you?
Well, Jaya?
I'll leave it to you, Igor, and I'll agree with you.
Well, I think, no, seriously, I think although those who have seen Commissioner Hogan at work as Commissioner for Agriculture over the last couple of years, know that he has that there's a special place for Southeast Asia in his political agenda. Even during these COVID times, he's been reaching out to trade ministers in Southeast Asia individually to make sure that we keep our also different FTA negotiations on track. So I think I'm pretty reassured about the political commitment of the commissioner, and we'll have the first meeting, as a structured meeting on the 29th of August, when he will meet virtually with the ASEAN economic ministers.
I think what is really critical is not what you say, but what you do. And I think Igor has listed out the areas in which ASEAN and EU have been working together, both as institutions, but also on the bilateral basis. And that itself is substantial. Whether ASEAN features or not in the document doesn't reflect the reality of the relationship. And also the promise and the potential in that relationship. I think Commissioner Hogan is quite committed to taking that forward. I think what is key is where we take it forward, how we take it forward, and how fast we can take it forward.
Yeah, it's certainly very true that when he was Agriculture Commissioner, he was a frequent visitor to the region and clearly enjoyed coming here and the relationships he built. And I'm sure in more ordinary times, he would have been a more frequent visitor already in his new role. We're coming towards the end of our time, so perhaps I'll just ask you one or two last questions. I suppose the key one is strategic partnership, which we started off with at the beginning. When do you see that actually coming to fruition? Will it be agreed this year, or we've got to wait a bit longer? What's your views, please?
I'll start off. I think my minister 2 years ago made it quite clear. As far as Singapore is concerned, we have a de facto strategic partnership. If you look at every one of the pillars in our relationship, that is a substantial relationship. The key issue of a strategic partnership then would be that, one issue is the nomenclature, but more important than the nomenclature is that how we can build it into something more meaningful. One of the questions I get here in Brussels that I have difficulty answering sometimes is that when we do upgrade it to a strategic partnership, what actually does it mean? What has changed? And I think we really need to work on substance and to give meaning to the relationship, more meaning to the relationship. I must add, it's a highly substantial relationship, but more meaning to the relationship than focus on the nomenclature.
Yeah, I won't venture into the timing prospects, but I would say this. I mean, Jaya said we have a de facto strategic partnership. I fully agree. I think the words in the communique are, in principle, strategic partnership. In a way, what matters in the substance. And I think from where I'm sitting, we see a European leadership that is very committed to Asia in general. We had a summit meeting virtually between the presidents with the leaders of Japan, Republic of Korea, with China, with India, all of that in the space of the last 3-4 months. And I think the ASEAN region is the obvious missing piece in that puzzle. So we need to work on that and make sure that we can strengthen the substance as well as the form.
Okay, thank you. And the final question to you both, as a wrapping up question, if you had a wish list, what 2 or 3 things would you like the other side to do to help bring the relationship closer together and take it forward up to another level? So what 3 things would Jaya like to see the EU do for ASEAN and vice versa for Igor? I think, Jaya, you can go first.
The first thing is the first point I made, the EU-ASEAN FTA, to have it to have it re-energized, to have it re-scoped, and to realize it. That's the first point. The second point is better coordination on reopening our borders, to have a structured dialogue on this, so that we all have common parameters and common standards, so that we work in tandem on reopening our borders, which should be key in terms of sustaining our relationship moving forward. And the third area is a stronger partnership, a stronger dialogue on vaccine development.
Well, from my side, I think I'll also repeat myself. I think the first thing would be to treat bilateral issues bilaterally. I think that would be a sign of the maturity of our partnership. Secondly, there is still new areas which are underdeveloped, and the one thing we haven't spoken about over the last hour is the issue of security and defense. European Union has made huge steps forward in building a defense union over the last couple of years, becoming a security actor. So definitely there's a lot of potential there. And the third thing, well, let me just agree with Jaya and go for vaccine security and vaccine development.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. You won't be surprised to hear that from the Business Council's point of view, Jaya's first one about promoting or re-energizing a region-to-region FTA would be top of our list, but I think we can agree with you both on all your other points as well. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you this afternoon or this morning for Jaya. I think we could have talked an awful lot longer, and perhaps we will do something again at another point and try and cover a broader range of subjects. But thank you both for your time, and both keep safe and well. And to our audience, please keep safe and well, and we'll be in touch again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you.